right, well, we'll go ahead and get started and just talk a little bit about what direct instruction is. A lot of times that name or that term is thrown out and people aren't really sure what that means. And so we'll talk about that really quickly. In the classroom, teachers will be presenting at the front of the room, and it's going to be super important that you utilize your curriculum that we have. We're very fortunate to have phenomenal programs and curriculum to use. You're going to want to make sure that you're delivering very effective and explicit instruction to students at all times. With that, it's going to be really important that you know your script and you feel comfortable and competent with delivering the script and the questions that come throughout that script. So being effective with your instruction is super important in direct instruction. It's also going to be really important that you're very clear and unambiguous. A lot of times people have a tendency to overtalk and over-explain, but it's going to be super important that what you say is impactful and that what you're saying is truly what is important and what needs to be said, and kind of taking out extra teacher talk. That way the students can really hear what is important and can learn what they're supposed to learn without a lot of extraneous information being crowding the airways, if you will. Another tenet of direct instruction is going to be that you're going to be providing a lot of modeling and a lot of scaffolding. It's going to be super important. And again, our curriculum is fantastic. It helps lend itself to all of these components of direct instruction. Everything that you teach, you're going to want to model. You're going to want to use auditory, visual, all those different types of learning styles in order to help you. You will find that the more you model at the beginning and the more you scaffold, the less you're going to have to go back behind yourself and help correct or help clear up confusion or help students who are not mastering. Because if you provide that modeling and that front loading of information at the beginning, kids are going to be learning and they're going to understand a lot better, and you're not going to have as much confusion. You're going to also utilize a lot of guided practice. Feel free to pop up extra examples, even outside of what's presented in the scripts. You can add some things to help the students understand. But that guided practice is super, super important. It helps them scaffold that learning, and then the final component will be that independent practice. You're going to always want to give students an opportunity to show what they've learned and to do it on their own. This is a great time for you to kind of walk behind them, or however you want to set it up in your classroom, but you're going to want them to be able to have a high volume of independent practice, and then that way you can give them immediate feedback and correction in case of confusion. For example, in math class, the Saxon program's phenomenal with doing the new concept, the guided class practice, lesson practice, and then finally that independent practice. And that would be the time, like I said, you would want to walk around the classroom or however you want to set that up and allow students to practice on their own and to be pulling them and helping them if they're confused or that they need a little bit of extra help. Our program also is phenomenal in providing education and the scripts and learning through small increments. You don't want to give them so much information that they don't have a chance to really practice each piece. So you're going to notice that each piece is going to be presented in small increments, giving lots of time for that practice, that feedback, and that way they can kind of assimilate that and then grow from there. During direct instruction, you are going to find you are kind of on a stage and you are almost putting on a performance, but at the same time, your students are going to be just as actively engaged. They're going to have their role and their part in it as well. They should be engaged the entire time that you're up there teaching. They're going to be active learners, active participants in this environment. So these are just a few of the tenets of what direct instruction is. That way, if you were to be asked what it is, you can kind of explain it a little bit. And now we're going to talk a little bit about why we utilize direct instruction. I've got a book here, information that was done in a study called Project Follow Through. It was a longitudinal study that was done from 1967 through 1977, and it followed and compared different models of instruction to determine which one was most effective. At the end of this presentation, there's the link to the webinar that Mr. Luddy had us watch, and it was a phenomenal webinar. it covered direct instruction, what it is, why, how, but it went through this project follow through and the results from the study. So we're just going to look at that really quickly, and it kind of helps to understand why we should be using direct instruction to teach our students rather than a different form or different methodology of teaching. In this picture here, you see a teacher up at the front, and you see students who are just kind of passive learners here. And I have to be honest with you, when I first started teaching back in 2000, I had all this wisdom that my professors had imparted on me. And when I started teaching, Franklin Academy had just opened 2 years prior, and I was hearing about this direct instruction, but it was so foreign to me. And I didn't take the time to really learn about it at that time. But what I was hearing was the teacher stands up at the front, pulls out a curriculum script and just starts teaching, and the kids just sit there, and that's how the kids were going to learn. I didn't take the time to go over their tour or really try to understand it, because I just had in my head what all my professors had just taught me about having to make sure you meet the needs of each of your students and individualizing the learning for them depending on their learning needs and things like that. And so I didn't give it a lot of thought. In this picture, you'll see the teachers standing up there, and it's almost like a Charlie Brown moment where the teacher's standing there talking and it just kind of comes out as nothing. And this was kind of the idea that people who were against direct instruction had, that the teacher's doing the talking, the teacher's doing the learning, and the kids are just sitting there. But as it turns out, we'll take a look at this next slide. Here are the results of this project follow-through study that was done. Again, it was a longitudinal study carried out over those years, and they went through and studied how children learn. And in looking at this chart, and if you watch that webinar or listen to it, or you get the book that Zach wrote, you'll notice here on this chart that they looked at several components. They looked at basic academic skills, problem-solving skills, and then finally self-esteem. So you'll see that in the dark blue, light blue, and the red. With the direct instruction model or methodology of teaching, you'll notice that students grew exponentially in their learning, basic skills, problem-solving, as well as their self-esteem. And then you can see these other types of learning, including problem-based learning and other kinds of learning that were, the buzzwords back then for teaching and for learning. And you can actually see that direct instruction was the only model in which all three of those areas grew exponentially. And some of the results of that, one of the biggest results, which I find really fascinating, is if you try to give students a huge cognitive load and do it as a problem-based discovery type model of education, you're going to find that it doesn't work with the way your brain processes information and the way that students learn. When you withhold guidance from them and you give them complex things and then just try to have them solve it, they don't really have that foundation in order to sift through all of the information and to learn. However, with direct instruction, you're going to introduce it incrementally in small parts, small components, and it's actually going to lead to higher efficiency. Students are going to learn what they need to learn, and then they will naturally be able to expand on that and extrapolate and get into those higher level thinking skills. So it's almost the concept of building from the foundation up. If you were to think about building a house, that's how direct instruction should work, giving them the information, giving them the guidance, helping them, and then that way they can build up, rather than just kind of dumping it all in their lap at one time. When you dump everything in their lap at one time, one, their brain can't process it all, but it also leads to a lot of anxiety, frustration, can lead to lower self-esteem, lower confidence, because it's frustrating for them. So the results of the longitudinal study clearly show that direct instruction is the best evidence-based approach and model for students to learn, and provides the biggest, highest potential for success in the classroom. Here is a picture that kind of explains this as well. If you imagine a bottle and you imagine your brain can only take in a little bit at a time. But if you try to shove it all in that top of that bottle, it's not all going to go in. And so ideally with our direct instruction model and with all of our curriculum, we're going to want to make sure that we're just giving small pieces at a time. And then that way it can make it to the back and it's stored in their long-term memory. So again, think of it as building a house or building blocks foundationally. Here's an example. I love this analogy as a former swimmer. When kids learn to swim, you don't just throw them in the deep end of the pool and say, go swim a 50 free, 50 butterfly. That's not how it works. You've got to start them on the side. You've got to start and have them kick their feet at first. Then you get them in a little bit. You get them to blow bubbles. You're going to want to start slow, start small, add and build in little steps, and scaffold back, and then eventually they will become swimmers. This is kind of a visual of how DI should look in the classroom. Now let's talk about how to implement direct instruction. And in looking at this list, you'll find a lot of these are classroom management type pieces and components, but they fit very nicely with us being able to deliver the direct instruction and to be able to utilize a high time on task and have best successes for the students. And it also allows you to use the time wisely. You're up there and you're using your time wisely and they're using their time wisely as well. So we'll go through this really quickly. It's super important that children have desks free of extra clutter. Kids are going to touch and play with anything that's out. And so you're going to want to set up your parameters and your protocols for what you want on the desks. For example, in reading class, they probably only need their reading book and a pen and a pencil. And they don't need their pencil pouches out. They don't need to have anything else to play with. If they have something, they will play with it. And so I would set those protocols up and implement them and practice them at the beginning of the year. And within a couple of weeks, you're going to find that they all come in, they know exactly what needs to be done, and they're going to start it. That sets them up for success. You're going to want to make sure your classroom is well managed and well organized. You're going to want to make sure that you're ready for your lessons each day. You've got your scripts ready. You want to utilize that high time on task, and any minute that you have to spend looking for materials or getting ready that's going to be a moment where they can lose focus and lose attention. So you're going to want them to be organized, but then you're also going to be wanting to be organized as well. One of the things we do at the Wake Forest campus is we have them go ahead and put their water bottles away. They don't, you can definitely implement water breaks throughout the day, but we find a lot of times the water bottles are falling off of desks, or if they're on the floor, they're getting knocked over, things of that nature. And any little thing that can take away from that learning environment can have the potential to kind of derail your lesson. We at Thales have a policy where students should be sitting up in ready position. A lot of the classes will have the STAR rules up: sit in ready position, tracking and tapping, answering on signal, and reading with expression. But this can be applied to every single subject, not just reading class. They should be sitting up, they should be sitting tall, they should have their feet on the floor, they shouldn't be up on their knees. Their eyes should be on the teacher, because if you're up at the front and you're presenting and you can see that all students have their eyes on you, then you know that they're all ready to answer. You know that you can present a question and you can give them a hand signal where they're supposed to be thinking. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. And everyone's eyes should be on you. That way you can ensure they're paying attention. So it's super important. Having their hands up on the desk is important too, because again, if they've got their hands in their desks, they'll play with anything that's in their desk. So you want to really set up, classroom management wise, a good environment in which to utilize that high time on task and be ready to teach without distractions. All right, moving on, as far as your tasks in the classroom, like I mentioned before, you're going to want to make sure that you have your scripts ready, that you feel confident and you feel comfortable. And the first couple of years, that is going to require you to pre-read your scripts and be ready. That way you can be up there and you can deliver those questions. And let's just say, for example, for an example's sake, if I were to say, what day of the week is it? I'm going to only ask that question one time. And I'm going to be sure that I ask it in a crisp, clear manner so that they know exactly what it is I'm asking them. And then I'm going to turn my voice off and I'm going to give them time to think. And there's nothing wrong with, I actually encourage you to ask a question and then say, think. That way you're giving students that opportunity, like, I'm asking you the question, and this is what you're supposed to be doing right now. You're supposed to be thinking. If I were to re-ask the question over and over, or rephrase the question, number one, I'm filling up those airwaves. And so the kids are hearing all this extra talk. And then sometimes, unfortunately, I might rephrase the question just slightly different. And before you know it, their brain's thinking of one answer, but then I've asked it in a little bit of a different way. And so I've really confused them. And so it's super important that when you know your script, you just ask that question crisply. And then what I do is I just put my hand signal up and they're thinking. And then obviously I would teach them my signals for how I want them to respond. You're going to find that when you ask the questions clearly and unambiguously, you're going to get crisp, clear answers and responses. With that being said, sometimes when we present questions, the script has a lot of words. You can feel free to look at the question that's being asked and you can paraphrase it, or you can chunk it and you can break it down a little bit so that you're asking them and only utilizing those airways for the very most important question or parts of the question. And that will hopefully allow you to ask it clearly, and then they'll get the answer. You'll get the answer that you're looking for when the students respond to you. It's super important for you to present from the front of the room. If you're walking around the room, the kids are then having to turn and look and find you, or they're going to use that as an opportunity to kind of get off task. So even in reading class, if you're doing a fact passage and students are reading, you're behind students, over their shoulders as they're reading. When you need to pause and you need to ask a question that's in the script, then go ahead and come to the front of the room and set up those protocols, eyes on me, finger in the book, and wait till you get up there. Don't be afraid to have that pause until you can see all the students' eyes on you, then ask that question. In our curriculum, thank goodness, we've got a ton of opportunities for high volume of practice and feedback, whether that's reading class, surely English, math class. The questions are always going to continue to spiral throughout the year. You'll find in reading class, you may have something you learn on lesson 1 and it'll still come up, lesson 130. So our curriculum and programs give us an opportunity for that practice. The homework does as well, the tests do as well. The nice thing about our testing is that we are able to see how students are doing and really find when they're struggling with certain concepts and give them that feedback that they need. So that's super important with the way we deliver and the how of how we deliver the direct instruction. I have this picture here, and I got this from Zach's webinar, this idea of a serve and return. You're going to want to be bouncing back questions and answers quickly at a brisk pace. Obviously, you don't want them to be confused, so you need to gauge kind of how quickly you can go through, but continue to give them that output, and then have them give you the output, and then you give them some input. Provide that immediate feedback to them so that they are engaged the entire time. They won't really have an opportunity to be playing with their friends or talking if you are up there kind of putting on that performance or that show. And then here, we do this a lot at Thales. We talk about it in terms of my turn, our turn, and your turn. But it's kind of this modeling idea of, I'm going to be up there and I'm going to do something. I'm going to show you something. We're going to practice it. And we've got great platforms and ways that we can do this on whiteboards, on the Apple TV, all kinds of different interactive approaches to doing this. But you're going to want to make sure that you're always modeling, as we mentioned before. And then you're going to want to make sure that you utilize that we do stage. Don't skip that stage, because if you skip that stage and go straight from my turn to their turn, you're going to find that there are still kids trying to figure out what it is that you just taught them. And so then you're going to end up spending actually more time than if you had just done that we do stage. So don't be afraid to do that part, and then finally pop it over to them. And that can look a little bit different depending on the subject, depending on the lesson. You may have them do partner work. You may have them do solely independent work, whiteboards and dry erase markers for them to do their answers, that kind of thing. During that you do stage, you're going to want to make sure that you're actually walking around and helping to facilitate that time as well, so that students are getting that feedback.
And one of the most foundational aspects of direct instruction is using a strong signal in your classroom. And, likely you've all been coached several times this year and you've been coached on this. Again, as Kristin said, it's really important that we ask students questions from the front of the classroom. Yes, we do want you to circulate during independent practice, but any new information should be delivered from the front of the classroom using a strong signal. And it's important that we give those strong signals so that we can determine if our students are mastering the content that we are delivering to them. Oftentimes signals can be either visual or auditory, and a lot of times that'll be a hand drop. So this means stop. And then when you drop your hand and snap, it requires your students to respond. A lot of times if they're looking in a text or you're pointing to the screen, it can be an auditory signal like get ready. But it is important that we have those strong signals so that students know what to expect and how to respond, so that then you as the teacher can determine if they are mastering the content. We also want to provide students with think time, and think time is really important because when students are given adequate think time, they are more likely to give a first time correct response. So that would be, you provide the question to the students, you give them 3 to 5 seconds to think about it, and then you provide them with that signal. You also want to prompt them by saying think, and this requires all students to, again, be on task and be engaged and an active participant in their own learning. You also want to determine whether questions are individual responses or whole group responses. And this is something that kind of takes practice as you begin to learn and adapt direct instruction. But that is the difference between a convergent response and a divergent response. So convergent responses have one specific answer that is correct, and those are what you want to ask your whole group. Individual returns are usually questions that provide students to use more critical thinking or their opinion questions. And then you always want to turn their response, individual turn, shorten it, and ask again to the whole group to repeat. And again, this is all because we want students to answer together so that we as teachers can determine whether they're mastering the content we're giving them. We also want to verify their responses. And oftentimes when we go into coaching classrooms, a student will answer. So for example, we will say, everybody, what is the month of the year? And, we'll give that 3 to 5 seconds of think time. We'll give that strong signal. Students will say January. And then a lot of times we teachers want to say, yes, great job. We want to praise them for getting the correct answer. But it's really important that we verify their response and repeat the correct answer, because when we do that, we give students another opportunity to confirm and hear the correct answer. So if we said, yes, January, this is how we want to verify every response to every question that we ask, whether that be a whole group response or an individual turn. We also want to repeat until firm. So it is not unusual for students to say December when it's really January, because they're used to asking that question. So we want to repeat until firm. We want to correct immediately. We don't want to give them another chance to answer incorrectly. We want to correct them immediately. No, this month is January. Everybody, what month? And that way it gives them another opportunity to get the correct answer. And sometimes you have to ask maybe 3 or 4 times, and that's okay, but we do not want to move on until students have mastered that one question or one concept. We want to reiterate that our curriculum is a spiral curriculum. So they will often come back and review concepts over and over and over. So especially for math, students may learn about fractions in quarter 1, and they may not see them again for another couple of weeks, even quarter 2. But it is that spiral curriculum, so students have more opportunities to review those new concepts and to review those old concepts so they can again build on what they learn. Accepting answers. So we do want to repeat until firm, and a lot of times when students get answers incorrect, we want to do the my turn, our turn, your turn. And the way we do that is we really want to model the correct answer. So my turn first. And then I would make sure I created that focus, all eyes on me. Wait until I have all students prepared and engaged, ask that question again and answer it myself, and then I would ask the whole group to do it with me again, and then I would test their knowledge with your turn finally. We really want teachers to also play the you me game. It's a great opportunity to praise students for not only behaviors, but really answering on signal and holding them to those high expectations. We also want them to answer or read like they speak. So what we call Goldilocks answers only, so that they're not too loud, not speaking too soft, they're not, reading too fast or too slow. We want them to read and speak like they, or read and respond like they speak. So the way we want to encourage them to do that, or a way we could do that, is to model for them what we want to hear. So a lot of times, especially in our littlest learners, they're really excited and they're really enthusiastic and they want to respond, so they're really loud and they're really excited. It's January. But we want to correct that behavior because we want them to respond like they speak. So you want to model perhaps speaking a little softer, which would then encourage them to respond like they speak. We want to talk a little bit about DI tiers, because it is not uncommon for it to take 3 years to learn all the nuances of direct instruction. So if you are a new to Thales teacher, a new to direct instruction teacher, do not be discouraged. There is a lot to learn, and there are a lot of small little things. I want to reiterate that these are not things that we just decided we are going to do, but it is all research backed, and there's a reason for absolutely every piece and part of it. We really want to start with what we would call tier 1 direct instruction techniques, and they're kind of listed here. Again, that's ready position, that's no hands, no call outs, clear signal, think time. And once we've kind of gotten those tier 1 attributes down, we would then start teaching you tier 2. And it's not all that different from the way we scaffold content and material for our students. We don't want to overwhelm and bombard our new to direct instruction teachers. We want to make sure that they have mastered those tier 1 concepts before we moved on to more tier 2 things like sounding out procedures, turning individual turns into whole group response, and then tier 3, which is usually vocabulary like aspects, flip-flops, and sentence substitutions and cumulative review. So it could take years to really master all of these things, all these nuances of DI, but they're all really important, and we do them for a reason. Likely many of you have been coached, and I think it's really important that our teachers understand that when we go in classrooms and we go and coach, we are not automatically sitting there and looking at you. We are always looking at the students first. I love this sentence that says, coaching is not about what the teacher needs to do. Coaching is about what the students need to do better. And you as the teacher are the vehicle for making that happen. So when we go in and coach, this is not a judgmental zone. This is, I see these students need to do A, B, and C better. You as the teacher are the vehicle to make that happen. So any kind of coaching is always about what the students need to do. Often they're doing great things, and we want to see and praise those too. But of course, there are always things that students could do better or need extra help on, and you as the teacher are the vehicle to do that, and we coaches are there to help support you in that way. So if you are new to Thales or new to direct instruction, there are a few tips I thought I'd add in here for how you can be successful. Start with high expectations for classroom management and behavior. I think Kristin touched on this a little bit, but it doesn't matter how great your DI is if you have poor classroom management, because you cannot effectively teach your class if your students are not on task and engaged. I think direct instruction lends itself well to classroom management because we do, have those strong signals and we do have those expectations. But if you first have not established routines and procedures and your students don't know what to expect of you, then you really can't take your instruction to its greatest potential with direct instruction. Pre-read your scripts and lessons, which Kristin talked about a little bit. And I remember in my first year at Thales, I had sticky notes in my scripts. I had things highlighted. I had notes on the side. I'd go home and make my husband be my student, and I would practice with him. So I think, preparing in advance, showing up and knowing what you're teaching is really important. And I think, as coaches, it's really obvious when people haven't pre-read their script and they don't know what they're teaching that day. And I think you as teachers can feel more confident in what you're teaching if you've prepared and read over it in advance. Also, be open to coaching and feedback. I think, again, it's really important that, you listen to that feedback, because we're there to help. And again, it's all about the students. We want our students to be successful. So also, it's important to ask for questions. I know that there are coaches and heads of school and assistant heads of school who would be thrilled to come in your classroom, to model, to coach you. If you're struggling with something, if it just doesn't feel right, if it's not coming naturally, happy to help. Make sure you're asking questions and asking if something's not feeling right and you need some help there. We've also added some helpful links and resources here on this slide. I really encourage you to look through all of this. Again, that first link is the rationale behind direct instruction techniques. It's the why behind why we do all the little things we do. It's a great resource to look through. Key phrases in K-5 classrooms. Again, this is really kind of the basics for DI, and I wouldn't even say this is for K-5 classrooms. I would make the argument that direct instruction is for all classrooms, because the research supports that this is the best way that students learn, whether they're pre-K through 5 or 6 through 12. Direct instruction is just basically best practice in teaching. DI task cards are a great resource to have, especially if you're new to DI. These can be laminated, printed out so that you can look through them. Great resource. Here's an article on why unison responses work in the classroom, and then another article on meta-analysis confirms effectiveness of old school approach. So direct instruction's been around a long time, and it still works. So those are great articles for you to check out as well. We've added some credits here for you. And then if you have any questions at all, go ahead and